Because even though there's an encouragement for social workers to be objective, my personal opinion is that I don't think it's possible for anybody to be completely objective 100% of the time. Number 6 is boundary setting. Oh my goodness. This one is a big one, guys. It's a big one because it ties into different elements of things that would help you to stay longer in practice as a social worker. Hello my lovely people, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chioma and I just want to warmly welcome you, especially if this is the first time you're stopping by here. But for all of you, my returning friends, thank you so very much. Today we're going to be talking about 10 skills that are important for social work practice, okay? I have not put this in any particular order. So I'm just going to talk about the 10 skills that came to me when I thought about making this video, and I hope that you find this helpful. Also, I have seen that a lot of you have questions regarding social work education and practice, so I would encourage any of you who just joined this family recently to please check out my previous social work related videos. I am sure that you would gain some information from there as well. Okay, so let's get started. Number 1 is empathy. The dictionary definition of empathy just talks to the ability to be able to share in people's emotions and feelings. So that's what empathy is about. And I feel like it's one of those core skills of social work, because how can you actually work with people in the time when they are most vulnerable, in the time where they are going through really tough times and tough situations, if you're not able to sit in that space with them and actually understand what they're going through? You're listening to them, no judgments, very important. So yeah, like I said, empathy is a big one. The second skill I want to talk about is self-reflection, or you can call this self-awareness as well. I feel like this is where you bring things back to yourself. This is where you reflect things back to yourself as a social worker. With this one, you want to be thinking about the influences that have actually shaped you as a social worker and you as a person. So think about your prejudices, your biases, and these things would be informed by your belief systems, like I said, past experiences and all of that. It's very possible that you can bring this into practice, because even though there's an encouragement for social workers to be objective, my personal opinion is that I don't think it's possible for anybody to be completely objective 100% of the time, right? And the reason why it's kind of hard for us to be objective is because we have all these influences in our lives that have shaped us to who we have become. And we can't just discard that because we become social workers. However, why it is important for you to be aware of this, or to always have that lens of self-reflection on yourself, is because there is something called transference and counter-transference in clinical practice. It just speaks to a situation where you're judging a client's situation through the lens of your own experiences, and you certainly do not want that to happen. It might be helpful for you to actually keep these prejudices and biases at the forefront of your mind, like keep it where you can actually see them, so that you can identify when they are beginning to get in the way of how you relate to your client. So self-reflection is a continuous practice. It's not something that you do once and you're done with it. It's a continuous part of your practice. You have to be constantly self-aware. Number 3 would be critical thinking skills and problem solving as well. I have put the both of them together because I don't think you can have one without the other. Like, you can't be a critical thinker if you're also not thinking along the lines of solving problems, right? So yeah, and please disagree with me if you think I have just said rubbish, okay? But yeah, so these two are really important. Problem solving and critical thinking, they go hand in hand, I would say. When you're meeting a client, like I said previously, it's possible that at the time you're meeting a client, they are at their most vulnerable. And so you have to be the calm voice and the calm mind in that place, thinking things through, trying to piece information together so that you're getting the full picture and then deciding how best to support the client. Remember, you always have to be client-centered in your practice. So when I talk about thinking about ways to support a client, I don't mean you telling them what to do, because that is frowned upon in social work practice. You work with the clients to achieve the outcomes that are in the client's best interest. So yes, problem solving is a big skill in social work practice, along with critical thinking. The fourth one I will talk about is time management. Okay, so if you're a social worker, for instance, who finds themselves in an environment where you're doing case management, then you would understand this better. Time management is key. At any point, you might be juggling a huge caseload. Sometimes you're juggling a caseload of up to 15 or 20 clients at once. And so you need to make sure that you're on top of every plan for each of those clients. And that can be a difficult thing to do if you're not organized and you do not have a way to efficiently manage your workflow. Before I talk about number 5, guys, if this is already making sense to you, would you consider subscribing at this point? It takes less than 10 seconds. So just click on subscribe, click on the bell icon to turn on notifications, and that's all you need to do. And then by the time you finish this video, please give me a thumbs up, all right? It does help to push out this video some more to people who might also need this sort of information. So please do not hold back. And that's another way to support me in this space. Thank you very much. So let's continue. Number 5 is going to be networking. Networking is a way to build relationships, to build rapport with people and to sustain those relationships. And I feel like social work is one practice that cannot really be done in isolation because you're going to be working with lots of systems. As a matter of fact, most social workers would find themselves in a practice setting that is interdisciplinary. It's very likely that you would find yourself working alongside psychologists and counselors or even doctors and nurses and top management people. That's the usual setting for a lot of social workers, except if you're maybe in private practice. Okay, so relationship building is key. So networking can be interagency networking or interdisciplinary in its focus. There's also a lot of collaboration in social work practice. So you just need to make sure that you're building structures that would help you as a practitioner to help your clients and serve your client better. Number 6 is boundary setting. Oh my goodness. This one is a big one, guys. It's a big one because it ties into different elements of things that would help you to stay longer in practice as a social worker. I'm sure some of you would have heard that there's a high turnover rate in social work practice as a result of burnout. And I feel like setting boundaries is one way to manage the risks around burnout, around vicarious trauma. So setting boundaries is a good way to protect yourself as the practitioner, but also your client. In some organizations, there would be policies around how to engage with the client or how not to engage with the client. There might be policies that prohibit physical gestures with clients, for example, like hugging a client, especially if you're working in a high trauma environment. For instance, if a client has suffered a sexual assault, they would most likely not take it well if you walked up to their space and hugged them. I know it might seem to you like walking up to them and hugging them just as a gesture of support, a gesture of care is a good thing. But as a social worker, you actually do not want to do that because that action of carrying out a physical action that brings them that close to you might replicate feelings of trauma that they have experienced as a result of the sexual assault. And that's why sometimes some of these policies are in place. I just gave you that example as a very basic example around setting boundaries. But as well, you want to set boundaries around how you manage your emotions and how you manage your client's emotions as well. You want to be welcoming, but at the same time, you want to set boundaries. There's something in social work practice that we try to guard against, which is clients developing an over-dependence on us because, like I said earlier, the goal is not for you to work for the client. The goal is not for you to instruct the client on what to do. The goal is to work with the client, okay, empower them to be able to find their own independence again and be able to advocate for themselves. So you really want to be careful. And I feel boundary setting is one of the ways to manage some of those tricky things that might arise in practice. Let's move on to number 7, which is communication. And by the way, if any of these skills are making sense to you, if you are a social worker watching this video and you feel like there are other skills you might want to share as well for the benefit of anybody in here who would benefit from that sort of information, do not hesitate to put that in the comment section. I always love the comment section to be an interactive space, so please feel free to put your comments on there. If you've got any questions about any of these, again, you can always put it down in the comment section. So let's continue with number 7. I was talking about communication. As a social worker, communication skills are super important. You need your verbal communication, written communication to be top notch, because yes, you will be communicating with clients and you want to be understood. You also want to understand your client. You will be doing a lot of writing, taking notes. Every contact you have with a client or on behalf of a client, usually your organization would expect that you have a record of all those interactions. So you will be doing a lot of writing, a lot of record keeping as well. So your written communication has to be top notch. And also remember that as a social worker, your case notes might become subject to a subpoena in court. And so you want to make sure that what you're writing actually makes sense. So in this regard, I want you to be thinking about making your writing as objective as possible. You don't want to be putting personal opinions in there. If a client has said something to you, use the same language the client has used to describe their situation in your notes. Like I said, you want to avoid situations where it is coming through in your notes that you were putting in your personal opinions, especially if those personal opinions are not backed by any professional discretionary practices. Okay, so if for instance you're making a recommendation as a professional, you also want to make it clear in your notes that it was a professional recommendation you offer to the client. Another aspect of your communication skills would be active listening. So this looks like listening to understand, asking questions to clarify, listening without judgment, without interrupting the client. And when you do ask questions, your questions should not come across as if you were judging the client for their choices or their behaviors. Rather, you want to clarify, you want to understand. So let's move on to number 8, which is advocacy. Social work, generally speaking, is underpinned by principles of social justice. And how this comes through in practice is you being empowering in your relationship with the client, because the big thing here is to empower your client to be able to become independent again, to find their self-agency and be able to advocate for themselves. So how you do this is by providing information, promoting the client's right to fairness, to inclusion, and always putting the client at the center of everything you do with them. Again, going back to client-centered practice. Okay? Number 9 is resilience. And I feel this one ties a little bit to what I said regarding boundary setting. So as a social worker, you want to build resilience. This is what will keep you lasting longer in practice. You want to build emotional resilience because oftentimes you would find yourself working in trauma environments. You would be confronted with people's traumatic experiences. And the only way that you can continue to take that in, client after client sharing traumatic experiences with you, is if you're building your emotional capacity to be able to handle these things without breaking down yourself. There is something called vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue. All these things are some of the risks that social workers face in practice, and you want to make sure that you're building your resilience because it would help you to manage those risks. I will talk about one bonus skill: cultural sensitivity. Again, going back to what I said about the influences that shape us. You are not your client. You're not an expert in your client's life. Your client has a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of wisdom that they have come from, depending on how they've been socialized into society. So you should do your best as a social worker to learn about a client's background. That might look like getting to know the particular social and cultural elements that are important in their lives, because you want to make sure that whatever decisions you're making with the client is in their best interest and that it is consistent with those elements that are important to them socially and culturally. So whether you call it cultural competence or cultural sensitivity, these are very important when you work with your clients as a social worker. And that was my bonus tip. And the very last thing I'm going to talk about would be trauma-informed practice. So what does this mean? Trauma-informed practice just speaks to the fact that you're creating an environment where the client feels safe, where trust building is happening, where the client has choice. The client obviously feels like they have a say in whatever decisions are being made regarding their situation and regarding their lives. You also want that environment to be empowering to the client. Like I said, it's all about helping the client to build self-agency to then go on and advocate for themselves, push to get the outcomes that are in their best interest. And another thing with trauma-informed practice is collaboration and inclusion. I hope this has made sense to you. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There might be other things that you remember if you're a social worker who gets to watch this video. So please put that in the comment section. So if you're someone who is studying towards becoming a social worker or you want to transition into social work practice, which one of these skills I mentioned in this video do you think you identify the most with? And maybe that's why you made the decision to become a social worker. Please share that as well. And before you go, again, don't forget to subscribe, share this video to anyone who you think might benefit from this information, and give me a thumbs up. I'll see you again in my next one. Bye-bye.